This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, with the emergence of hot-button religious issues in the campaign and the selection of a Roman Catholic as the Republicans' vice presidential nominee, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend counsels the left to open their hearts to people of faith. What if every child was given a personal savings account at birth and required to contribute a small percentage of his or her lifetime income to it? Author Phillip Longman has a slew of thoughtful proposals like this on how to rebuild the middle class. And Bill Press talks with columnist Frank Rich about the meaning of Paul Ryan's selection as the Republican vice presidential candidate. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, eldest daughter of Robert and Ethel Kennedy, has written and advocated for progressive causes. Today, she talks with us about the role of religion in public policy and reminds us that progressives need to reach out to people of faith. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend is a lawyer, adjunct professor at Georgetown University, former lieutenant governor of Maryland, chair of the nonprofit American Bridge, an organization that raises funds for Democratic candidates and causes. In addition, she is on the board of Catholic Democrats. Eldest child of Robert and Ethel Kennedy, Mrs. Townsend also the author of the book, Failing America's Faithful, How Today's Churches Are Mixing God with Politics and Losing Their Way. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, as always, nice to speak with you. Thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Great to talk with you, too.
Now, a number of conservative Catholics hold political beliefs that directly contradict teachings of the Pope and statements by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops on issues like torture, the death penalty, economic inequality. Should that matter in the political arena, especially since those on the progressive side sometimes depart from official teaching themselves?
Well, I think whether you agree with the Catholic Church on everything or disagree with the Catholic Church on anything shouldn't really matter in the political sense, and that people should judge you on what you say and what you care about, and people can judge you on that. What I do think you've raised is a very interesting point, which is sometimes Catholics, such as myself, get criticized by the Church or other very conservative Catholics for not being their type of Catholic. And that is, I think, really unacceptable in our political dialogue.
Now, you've written that for too long, the subject of religion has become polarized, politicized by the right, largely ignored by the left. How should the left recognize the role of religion in public life?
I think that the left, let me tell you why I think a number of the people on the left don't believe in God, so they probably feel uncomfortable with religion. Maybe they were religious when they were young and feel distanced by their church. But I think that they should understand that we are largely a religious nation. 85% of Americans say they believe in God, which means that if you want to reach people, you have to listen to where they are and not, dismiss what is deeply held beliefs, but respect that people believe deeply in God and in a particular type of faith action. And so I would, what my hope was is that the right, that the left would understand that, throughout history, all the great progressive movements had a religious underpinning, from the Great Awakenings to the social gospel. Franklin Roosevelt said that the New Deal was the Sermon on the Mount written into law. My uncle John Kennedy talked about civil rights as a moral issue as deep as the scriptures. So I think that rather than dismiss religion, I think the left has to open their hearts to people of faith. Maybe we don't agree on all the issues, but not dismiss people because of their deeply held religious beliefs.
We're speaking with Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, author of the book Failing America's Faithful, How Today's Churches Are Mixing God with Politics and Losing Their Way. Do you think that there is a Democratic morality and a Republican morality? And if so, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I think that, actually the Pope was fascinating in his trip to Latin America just recently, in which he talked about how sometimes people think that being a Catholic, it only extends to personal morality. How do you act at home or with your family? And he said that's not enough, that, we act in the world, and therefore we need a morality that fits the world. And I think that's true. I mean, you can't just say you're nice to your children and your wife and then rip people off at work, or lobby for changes in legislation that has you pay a lower tax rate. If you're a millionaire or a billionaire, then you're secretary. That's not sort of morally right, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I can't disagree with that. A lot of Southern Protestants seem to think that Mitt Romney's Mormonism disqualifies him as a potential president or even as a Christian. Some call it a cult. But weren't all religions a cult at one point?
Well, I'm not going to say they're a cult. I think that's a demeaning word about religion. So I'm not going to say that. I say, people express their deeply held beliefs, their need. Well, we all have a need to understand why we're on earth, what is our purpose, and we find it in different ways. Some, Mormons find the story of Joseph Smith fascinating. In contrast, love the stories in the Bible. But what I think what we ask for in our political leaders, and this is what I think is critically important, is to say, do we trust this person? How are they on the issues that are important to America, to us? Will they be straightforward? Do they have our best interest at our heart? And do they have the competence and the experience to be a good leader? Not what their faith is.
As a product of Catholic schools and an advocate for character education, do you think there's a role for the practice of teaching of religious values in public schools?
I think there's certainly a role for the teaching of helping to imbue good character in public schools, and I have done that in the state of Maryland. In fact, most public schools were formed in order to teach character. If you look at the enabling statutes of many of the public schools, they talked about, good and healthy democratic values, responsibility, thinking, independent thinking, a sense of honesty. Yeah, I think you can't run a school without values. How would you run a school if everybody thought it was okay to lie all the time or hit or fight all the time? So, and we certainly have programs in schools to stop the use of drugs or early, unprotected sex or sex at all, and for younger children. And these are all values that we think are important, and of course we have a role to instill them. I mean, democracy doesn't exist without values.
Now, you've mentioned your father, Robert Kennedy, had joked that priests are Republicans and nuns Democratic. If there is some truth to that observation, what does it mean for the church?
Well, it means that we're a diverse group. The Catholic Church is big. It has 1 billion members. It has a lot of Catholics in the United States. So it just means that, you can be Catholic and you don't have to be of one political party. I mean, you can see that the bishops feel much more comfortable these days in the Republican Party, and you see that the nuns stood up and defended President Obama's health care plan. So right there is this perfect example of they've gone to similar schools, they've read the same encyclicals, and yet they come to different conclusions as to what is politically closest to their deeply held beliefs.
Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, author of the book Failing America's Faithful, How Today's Churches Are Mixing God with Politics and Losing Their Way. Kathleen, thank you so much for your time with us, as always, on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Hey, it was great to talk with you as well. Take care.
You as well. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Coming up in just a few minutes, demographer Phillip Longman offers a variety of ideas on how to make sure that upward mobility remains possible for today's generation of young workers. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Among the higher hurdles that American marketing geniuses have tried to leap were attempts to convince car buyers to drive the ultra-ugly Edsel and to convince consumers that what they needed was a new Coke. But now comes the marketing leap that even Superman couldn't clear, selling Mitt Romney as a warm, loose, down-to-earth, regular guy who cares most about American working stiffs. Oops, take that back. Henceforth, do not ever let the word stiff be printed, uttered, or implied in the same sentence with Mitt's name. That was the old Romney image, and it is now officially passé. The branding of the new, relaxed Romney is being unveiled throughout this week's 4-day Republican National Convention in Tampa. The stage itself, a $2.5 million structure of dark wood and warm tones that's said to be the most intricate, market-tested piece of stagecraft ever designed, is meant to convey conviviality. Rather than an imposing podium, this one is only 6 feet high, with swooping steps, carefully constructed to make the multimillionaire nominee appear close to the people and approachable. Romney's convention planner exults that, as a viewer, you'll not have a sense that you're, quote, looking at a stage, you're looking into someone's living room. Wow, maybe Mitt will be in his jammies. That would really say relaxed. The whole show is meant to be a bit of Oprah and a touch of Martha Stewart, with some MTV thrown in, which is somewhat disingenuous, for all three of those are fundamentally Democratic Party in spirit rather than Republican. This is Jim Hightower saying, as jazzy and expensive as this Romney remake is, I don't see it selling. After all, Mitt is Mitt, an aloof, genetically uptight child of privilege who's been in the public eye for a decade. They can't make a sow's ear out of a silk purse.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Author and demographer Phillip Longman says almost half of baby boomers do not have a retirement nest egg. He shares with us a series of provocative ideas about how to reverse the downward mobility of the middle class. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Joining us now, Phillip Longman, a senior research fellow with the New America Foundation's Health Policy Program, where he currently concentrates on delivery system reform. He is also a senior fellow at the Washington Monthly, formerly a senior writer and deputy assistant managing editor at U.S. News and World Report. He has won numerous awards for his business and financial writing. Phillip Longman, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you recently wrote that whether Democrats succeed in stimulating the economy or Republicans succeed in cutting taxes, it won't matter. Why not? What are we missing?
Well, it'll matter, but the point I was trying to make is that even if we were to get the unemployment rate back to where it was in 2007, that the great mass of America would still be hurting because we were hurting back then. So we need to create more jobs, but we also need to look at more fundamental things that were eroding the wealth of the middle class and eroding the upward mobility of young people before this Great Recession.
One of the big issues facing Americans is that baby boomers as a group don't have enough savings or pensions to live comfortably in old age. how serious an issue is this at a time when people are talking about ending Medicare as we know it?
Well, it's very serious, and I think something we'll be talking about endlessly for the next 10 to 20 years, which is that the elderly are going to be the most rapidly growing poverty group in America if we don't do something real serious real soon. Frankly, it's too late for many of us baby boomers, but at least we can take some measures to help the next generations not make the same mistakes we did.
Mm-hmm. Is it really true that young Americans today are behind where their parents were in terms of realizing that American dream?
Well, of course, a generation's a big thing, but for the vast majority of young people today, they are very much encumbered with debt, for example, at levels that previous generations never had to endure. So, the average student coming out of college now with student loans has about $25,000 in debt. And I think for the class of 2011 now, more than half of them are either unemployed or working in jobs that don't require a college degree. We also have studies showing that the avenues to upward mobility are much less than they were in the past, much less than they are even in supposedly class-bound Europe today. So by many measures, we're seeing massive downward mobility among today's young people, millennials, and Gen Xers, and boomers too.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Phillip Longman, Senior Research Fellow with the New America Foundation's Health Policy Program, formerly a Senior Writer and Deputy Assistant Managing Editor at U.S. News, World and Report. Are these bleak observations primarily the result of conservative economic policies?
Yes, in a word.
All right, and I guess we go to the next question now. We'll let you expand on that.
All right. I mean, it's a combination of some things that had to be done because of the aging of the population and changes in technology and other things. Democrats, many of them went along with some of these changes back in the 1980s and 90s, and unfortunately they were poorly executed. I'm thinking in particular of this massive change, really on the order of the New Deal that we made in the 1980s about how each generation was going to provide for its old age. So in the 1980s, with bipartisan support, we created this system of 401ks and individual retirement accounts and dramatically cut back Social Security for future generations at that time. These were things that some of them needed to be done, but unfortunately we didn't mandate that people save for their retirement, and also at the same time we were telling people that they now had to trust their retirement savings to the sharks on Wall Street. We were telling the sharks on Wall Street that there are no more rules. So both parties are complicit. I would say, on balance, conservative ideas poorly executed have brought us to this point more than anything else.
Now, I get the feeling that current conservative ideology would only perpetuate this problem. Are there things that can be done now that can offer at least some level of a quick reversal to some of these things and maybe right the ship, if you will?
Quick reversal is pretty difficult, but to begin with, today's younger generation, yes, there's many things that we can do. In this special issue of the Washington Monthly, I float a plan for what I'm calling American stakeholder accounts. Essentially, the idea is that every child, when they're born today, already gets a Social Security number. Going forward, they would also get a savings account into which their parents or grandparents could contribute some money. For low-income children, we'd have the government start some money. And then throughout life, we would have a mandatory savings program that might require you to commit, say, 4% of your income going forward. if it's mandatory, then we don't wind up with a great problem that we have today, where close to a majority of baby boomers really have no retirement savings at all. Human nature is what it is, and people need help and prodding and nudging to do the right thing when it comes to their Social Security or security in old age. So that's a plan going forward that would help a lot. We also have to make a lot of progress on the whole debt side of the average American's balance sheet, because it's hard to believe, but throughout human history, going back to the Code of Hammurabi in ancient Mesopotamia, every civilization has always had laws against usury, the charging of outrageous interest rates on loans and debts. And that was true, for the Pilgrims. It was true all through American history up until the 1970s, when, again, both parties conspired to just bring us a world in which there was no regulation of debt. And so we've had this, in the last generation, explosion of predatory lending in credit cards and mortgages and student loans across the board. And that it has to be a very high priority, because so much of what is the problem today for boomers and the next generation of elders is not just that they didn't save enough, but they got into really bad loans. It's not that they spent so much more money on themselves, despite stereotypes. The statistics show that, baby boomers were not particularly spendthrift in the sense of buying all kinds of luxury products. But when you come into this world encumbered with student loans and credit card contracts that have all these hidden fees and mortgages that explode on you, it's the makings of the undoing of American middle class and reversal of all the progress we've made for the security of the elderly in American society.
We're speaking with Phillip Longman, senior fellow at the Washington Monthly. You make the point that popular tax policies that help create wealth only create it for the rich, the people who can afford to have IRAs or homes to deduct interest on. Do you really think there's a chance that those tax breaks will be repealed? I mean, there's some awfully popular breaks for people across, whatever,
right.
Republicans, Democrats, third party, whatever. I mean, a lot of people take advantage of those and want those to stay.
Well, just to begin with some background, the United States today spends about $500 billion a year in a bundle of different policies that are designed to help people acquire assets and build their assets. These include everything from the preferential treatment of capital gains to the home mortgage deduction. But these policies are really Robin Hood in reverse. 80% of the benefit of these programs goes to the 20% richest people in America, who are, of course, the people who need the least help in becoming wealthier yet. And yet that basically is our asset building policy. Now, normally you'd be right, I think, in saying that it's politically impossible to take on these entrenched interests that benefit from these various tax loopholes, except that I think all political observers are agreed that early next year we're going to have a gigantic national discussion and debate in Congress about reforming the tax code as a way of building, first of all, closing these long-term deficits, and also of building some more equity and fairness into the tax system. So it's going to be on the table. A lot of very powerful interest groups, from everybody in the military-industrial establishment to everybody who collects Social Security to road builders. Everybody is vulnerable here to major overhaul of federal spending. And while we're having this conversation, why not bring into the mix that we should reform this $1 trillion that we're spending on helping rich people get richer, to readjust those policies so that they help people of modest and low incomes to rise up in American society. Oddly, this whole agenda is something that actually has quite a bit of appeal to conservative-minded people who, are focused on the importance of individual responsibility and of paying your own way and of not becoming dependent on government. And I think we've seen a lot of support from Republicans even for policies like the one I described that would mandate individual savings from birth.
Can we expect to see some change then?
Well, I think so. I think it's quite an amazing moment. But just to give you an example, Rick Santorum, the former senator from Pennsylvania, who's perhaps one of the most conservative Republicans running in this year's presidential election, spent the last 3 or 4 years co-signing with Democrats to create a savings program like the one I just described. In the current hyper-partisan atmosphere, you won't hear Rick Santorum saying that this moment, but it is something that has something for both liberals and conservatives to like about it. So, and obviously the status quo is not going to hold that much longer. With these levels of unemployment and this level of hurt among both young people and old people, we are at the brink where something really does have to give.
I'm Phillip Longman, Senior Research Fellow with the New America Foundation's Health Policy Program, concentrating on delivery system reform, also Senior Fellow at the Washington Monthly. Phillip, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press interviews columnist Frank Rich about the meaning of Paul Ryan's selection as the Republican vice presidential candidate. Not a game changer, he says.
Well, Republicans now say we welcome a debate on Medicare, welcome it or not. That's what they've got once Paul Ryan joined the ticket. Writing about that and a whole lot more, one of our favorite guests and a good friend for a long time, Frank Rich, of course, is now with New York Magazine, writer at large, and also executive producer of Veep on HBO. So he knows something about vice presidential candidates, right? Hi, Frank. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Okay. So is Paul Ryan really a game changer here, Frank? How do you read it?
No, I think we already know the answer is not at all, in that there's been almost no bounce. Always the vice presidential pick creates some sort of bounce for the
Sarah
presidential
Palin
candidate.
did.
Yeah, and here it's been, 1 point maybe or 2 at most in some polls. And it's just, just forget about his views, which I strongly disagree with, and I know you do too, Bill. Just take that aside entirely. Let's, just look at the raw politics of the situation. Mm-hmm. He doesn't add any diversity to the ticket whatsoever. Right. He's another white conservative with inherited wealth. In fact, they sort of look like each other. The House has whoever you are in the House, it's the worst brand in America, except maybe a cable repairman. I mean, it's right down at the bottom. It's the way people used to joke about used car salesmen.
10% approval rating.
Yeah, right. And then he colors in in my view, radical right policies that Romney has been trying to hide that his party supports. And now we learn also that he's a co-sponsor on a front that having nothing to do with Medicare or budget, a co-sponsor of an onerous bill with Todd Aiken, who's now becoming, I think, probably the most toxic man in American politics overnight.
No, exactly.
An onerous bill, by the way, aimed at women and women's reproductive rights.
Right. So Paul Ryan really, and there hasn't been I'm sure we'll hear more about this. He is as extreme right on the social issues as he is on the fiscal issues, and as you just point out, and I want to get back to that in just a second. But,
sure.
But one thing that Paul Ryan, and this is what surprises me about this pick, Frank, is that where Mitt Romney has been so vague about his policies, right? Mm-hmm. Paul Ryan is Mr. PowerPoint, right? He's Mr. Specific. He whips out his budget and will tell you in excruciating detail what's in it at a moment's notice, right?
Exactly. And so he doesn't allow any wiggle room for the ticket. You're absolutely right. He's the antithesis of the vague, when Romney releases a 59-point plan about the economy, I guess he chose 59 over 57 because Hines already had 57. There's nothing in it. If you read it, it's like the verbal equivalent of styrofoam pellets. Mm-hmm. When Ryan releases a detailed budget, it is full of that mind-numbing detail you describe, all of which now nails the Republican Party to very specific cuts, very specific policies that Romney's been trying to fudge.
And what I've been trying to think back. And I haven't yet come up with the answer whether or not there's been any other vice presidential nominee who has driven the debate, in which Ryan is already doing. I mean, Dick Cheney didn't do that, right? Al Gore didn't do that. God knows. No,
they've driven the campaign, of course, and examples of that would be Palin and certainly Dan Quayle, at least in the early days, but rarely the debate. Although, if you look back now at 2008, I would have to say that Palin ended up driving a part of the debate. It was a part that McCain didn't really want to embrace. Of course, there are things that Romney doesn't want to embrace about Ryan,
right?
Which was to make Brand Obama is not a real American, and to make him some kind of terrorist, foreign terrorist,
palling around with terrorists.
Remember those rallies in the fall when people shout out treason and all of that. So there she was, sort of driving the debate, and interestingly, representing the same base of the Republican Party that in a much kinder, gentler way Paul Ryan also represents. And Ryan, I should say, has not been involved in birther nonsense or racial nonsense the way that Palin was, but she did drive some of the debate more than you'd expect, and again with a rather pallid, older and somewhat cautious Republican candidate.
Well, and finally on this, I know it's hard for you or me to put ourselves in this position, but if you try to project yourself as Romney or a close advisor to Romney, is there a point in August where you say, let's stop talking about jobs and the economy and let's talk about Medicare instead?
Well, the Republican strategists have said, and Romney's strategists have said from the beginning of this presidential campaign, every day that we talk about how bad the, quote, Obama economy is great. Every day we're not is lost.
Right.
Well, now they're going to have a week talking about, we're going to be back in Sandra Fluke territory. We're going to have a good solid week talking about reproductive rights and the Republican attitude towards women, which is largely despicable, at least in the official part of the party, in the run-up to the convention. Forget about jobs. I mean, the truth is that they're sort of a full employment center for commentators like us. That's their jobs plan.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking with Frank Rich, writer at large for New York Magazine. You can follow him and read his good stuff there at nymag.com, unless you're a subscriber like I am. Or you can follow Frank on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @FrankRichNY. He owns New York. So Todd Akin, here Claire McCaskill, probably the most threatened Democrat for re-election in the Senate. She has some luck of the draw getting Todd Akin as her opponent because he's the most extreme of the candidates, and he proved it with this comment where he told a reporter that, he was against abortion in all cases, even for rape, because if it's legitimate rape, then the woman's body will just take care of that. I mean, how insensitive, not only that, how dumb can you get, Frank?
Well, it's insensitive, but it's also insane. This guy is on the Science and Technology Committee of the House, and
Whoa.
if that is an example of how
That's scary.
the lunatics have taken over the asylum, I mean, it reminds me of there's in Joe Heller's great novel Catch-22. There's a couple that can't get pregnant, and they don't know what's going on, and they go to see the doctor, and the doctor takes out a little model, and turns out that they're not doing the act correctly. I think that's what's needed for him and some others in this party, including, by the way, Rush Limbaugh, who didn't seem to understand the function of birth control pills when he went off on Sandra Fluke months back.
Well, and as you pointed out, you alluded to earlier, even though the Romney campaign was quick to say, no, we don't agree with Todd Akin. However, Paul Ryan co-sponsored with Todd Akin in the House a measure that was called the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, where they said the only cases where abortion might be allowed would be in cases of forcible rape, right?
Right, as opposed to unforcible rape, which is just, a mere day in the park, walk in the park. This, I have to say, it really is infuriating because we're talking about, first of all, this is aimed at a majority of the American population.
Yes.
And it is so patronizing, as well as ignorant, and it's so beyond legitimate. People have. I'm a completely pro-choice person. I feel that a woman has the right to choose under any circumstances. But let's say that you did have religious or moral qualms about some aspects of abortion. This has nothing to do with any of that. This is all about. Women will decide what's a real rape or not. I mean, that's the level this has gotten to. And women are making up rapes to get abortions. This is the attitude that they are taking. That's what they're saying with this language, and it's reprehensible.
And
really.
Paul Ryan's link to it is really troubling. I think for the Romney, and will prove to be for the Romney campaign. Finally, Frank, I can't let you go without asking you about the biggest story of the day, as far as we're concerned here and at the Full Court Press, and that is it's revealed. I think it was on Politico this morning. The FBI confirming they've been doing an investigation that last year, on a congressional delegation, a whole bunch of Republican congressmen led by Eric Cantor, though he didn't participate in this. They had a big party on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, which, of course, is a very sacred place. Got a lot of heavy drinking going on, and then a lot of them went for a midnight swim in the Sea of Galilee. One of them actually skinny dipping, a Republican congressman from Kansas. You never thought Republicans could have so much fun, Frank, did you?
Never could, and of course, why not use the Sea of Galilee for a baptism? And you know darn well that these are people who just, in a cynical way, for reasons that have nothing to do with what they really feel about Jews or Israel, in my view, constantly exploiting their love of Israel, their love of the Jewish people. I say this as a Jew. This stuff always gives me the creeps when it's coming from politicians who have another motive, and they probably don't even know what the Sea of Galilee is. They who knows? They probably thought they were at the Venetian with Sheldon Adelson in Vegas.
I'll tell you what, evangelicals know what the Sea of Galilee is.
That's for sure.
Where Jesus walked on the water, and I don't think this is going to be, people are going to take kindly to this at all.
Exactly.
Oh, Frank, God, I'll tell you, it makes good work and good fun for you and me. It
does indeed.
That's a silver lining.
Great to talk to you about, as always, Bill.
All right, thanks, Frank. Frank
Take
Rich, one of my favorites, best writer, I think, columnist in the country at New York Magazine, writer at large, Frank Rich.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, Phillip Longman, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org